The video opens by constructing a suspense-driven narrative around a supposed information gap in the study of the interstellar object 3I Atlas. It claims that for a stretch of time, major Western space agencies and observatories, including NASA and the European Space Agency, were effectively blind to the object. The stated reason is twofold. The object's position relative to the Sun created a blinding glare that made direct observation from Earth-based and near-Earth instruments impossible, and a dust storm on Earth further complicated visibility from ground-based telescopes. Into this gap, the video introduces China's Tianwen-1 spacecraft, which has been orbiting Mars, as the one instrument that supposedly retained a clear, undisturbed vantage point throughout this blackout period. The framing is deliberately dramatic, describing Tianwen-1 as a silent, solitary witness above the noise, while the rest of the world's scientific infrastructure was effectively sidelined by circumstance. From there, the video shifts into explaining why Tianwen-1 was uniquely positioned. It argues that the spacecraft's orbital geometry around Mars placed it at an angle relative to the Sun and Earth that avoided the interference plaguing other instruments. This allegedly let it observe 3I Atlas continuously through a scientifically critical window, the period just before the object's perihelion, or closest approach to the Sun. This phase is significant in cometary science because it's typically when a comet's true nature becomes most visible. Increased heating causes outgassing, fragmentation, changes in tail structure, and shifts in brightness that reveal information about the object's composition and structural integrity. The video positions this as the moment when, if 3I Atlas were a conventional icy comet, it should have started behaving in predictable, well-modeled ways. The next section of the video describes what Tianwen-1 allegedly recorded, and this is where it begins building its central claims of anomaly. Rather than showing the fragmentation or breakup that standard cometary models would predict as an object heats up near the Sun, the footage is said to reveal a stable, coherent structure that was, if anything, growing brighter over time. The video describes a dust coma, the cloud of gas and dust surrounding a comet's nucleus, that was thickening and stabilizing into a symmetrical plume, rather than thinning, dispersing, or breaking apart erratically as expected. It emphasizes that every wavelength analyzed from the Mars orbiter's instruments converged on the same basic picture: a dense cometary coma, a distinct jet structure oriented toward the Sun, and a tail that was already measurable even from the distance of Mars' orbit. The brightness of the object, it claims, was significantly higher than pre-existing models had anticipated. Building on this, the video highlights what it presents as a particularly strange detail. The brightness of the coma didn't fluctuate randomly, but instead followed what the narration calls a periodic, rhythmic pattern. It stresses that patterns, as opposed to chaotic or random variation, are treated seriously in the study of interstellar objects because they can imply some kind of underlying structural or rotational regularity. Alongside this, ultraviolet sensors aboard Tianwen-1 are said to have recorded a spike in UV reflectivity that lined up with expected rotational models in terms of timing, but the magnitude of that spike was allegedly too large to be explained by a small, ordinary nucleus. The video frames this ambiguity as evidence that something about the object was either rotating unusually fast or reacting in some other unexplained way, describing it evocatively as an active engine of energy rather than a passive, quietly evaporating comet. The narrative then reiterates and reinforces the idea that Tianwen-1 was functioning as the sole working observational asset during this period. It describes how, as 3I Atlas moved closer to the Sun, European ground stations were rendered completely unable to track it because the angle between the object and the Sun, called solar elongation, made any attempt at direct imaging pointless. The glare would simply overwhelm any image. Meanwhile, in this account, Tianwen-1's position in Mars orbit kept it clear of this obstruction, allowing it to document, in the video's words, in real time, the development of new jet structures, the elongation of the dust tail, and the formation of what it calls an antitail, an extended plume said to have stretched across millions of kilometers. This antitail is described as growing far faster than early models predicted, and forming coherent, organized lines rather than a chaotic, randomly scattered spray of debris, which the video treats as evidence of directed release rather than simple, passive outgassing. This sets up what the video presents as its core paradox and the crux of its entire argument. Normally, according to classical cometary physics, an object releasing this much energy and material near the Sun should be undergoing visible fragmentation, breaking into pieces as internal stresses from heating overcome its structural integrity. Yet the video claims Tianwen-1's data shows no such fragmentation. The nucleus, it says, remained coherent, and the coma stayed consistent in shape and behavior throughout. This mismatch, an energy profile resembling a rapidly disintegrating comet, paired with a structural profile suggesting an intact, whole object, is treated as the video's signature contradiction. It argues that producing jets at the scale observed should require exposing far more surface area than a single solid body of the object's estimated size could plausibly have, unless the object has some kind of internal cavity, layered composition, or otherwise non-typical internal architecture. The video frames this as the likely reason for any hesitation on China's part in releasing the data, suggesting that findings of this nature would generate not just scientific debate but public unease. Following this, the video describes another supposed anomaly, what it calls structure within the coma itself, specifically, a darker band or ridge within an otherwise bright, diffuse cloud. It argues this kind of feature shouldn't exist if the underlying nucleus were simply spherical or irregularly shaped in the ordinary sense, since such shapes wouldn't produce a distinct, repeating internal division like this. The video notes that this feature appeared consistently across multiple exposures and was aligned in a specific way relative to the object's jet structures. It floats a few possible mundane explanations, a density variation, a shadow caused by uneven heating, or some kind of geometric occlusion, but pointedly notes that most traditional astronomers avoid a particular more speculative interpretation, that the nucleus might not be an unstructured chunk of rock and ice, but something with actual internal structure, organization. This is tied to a specific individual, unnamed beyond a passing mention, whose more speculative views on the object the video suggests are now seemingly supported by this new data.